I wrote this article for the parish magazine, and then Chris Shepherd, who used to at the time run the Rural Life Museum, said, would I help with an exhibition they were going to do about Tongham? What did I know about Tongham? I said, well, we're a home for heroes. Heroes, he said. I said, well, we've got Sir Peregrine Maitland in our churchyard. He was a hero of the Battle of Waterloo. And we've got the two railwaymen who were awarded the George Medal for the Tongham Raid. What Tongham Raid, he said. So, now read on. So I did this exhibition at Tilford, and it went down very well, and I've been answering questions about it ever since. Now, for you, those of you who don't know where Tongham is, that is an 1822 map, and it shows that yellow line there is the Hog's Back. You can see Farnham down in the sort of halfway up. That's Farnham Park, that green splodge. You've got Aldershot, and you've got Tongham, and you've got Seal, the other side of the Hog's Back here. So the little village has always been close to both Farnham and Aldershot. But of course, Aldershot in 1822 was not the military metropolis it is now, or was. It was just a little rural village, just like Tongham was. And the big town, the local market town, was Farnham, or going the other way, Guildford. And because Guildford was important and Farnham was important, they built a railway between them. So there's a map of Tongham in 1871, and that quite clearly shows the railway line going across there with a station. Manor Farm. It was all rather unfortunate because when the railway went through, they went across the farmyard, and it screwed up the farm considerably, and in fact the farm went bankrupt. But Tongham was just a crossroads. You've got a farm, you've got a church, which came in 1866. A bit further up the road here, you've got the Poyle House, where the squire lived. You've got the manor house down here, and you've got Grange Farm. And there is our railway station. Now, the railway station was built by the London and South Western Railway, and it opened in 1849. And it ran down from Guildford through Ash Green to Tongham to Farnham, and then it went on to Alton. Didn't touch Aldershot at all, because why should it? Aldershot's a little rural village. Why should they have a railway station? And Aldershot, in fact, used Tongham Station when they were building the camp to bring a lot of the building supplies in. They used the Basingstoke Canal. The roads weren't very good, so they used the railway station here at Tongham to bring most of the building materials, etc., etc. In fact, they built a little spur line up into the building side of the camp to make things easier. Because Aldershot didn't have a station until 1870, when they put a loop in from Brookwood down across to Farnham, missing out through Aldershot and across to Farnham, missing out Tongham altogether. So that really was the end of Tongham as an important station. And there was a spur line from the station up to the gasworks in 1898 in Aldershot, but the passenger line finished in 1937, and they just used the railway for goods, including, if you can see where the railway station is there at the top, where it says goods yard, there's a railway siding, and that railway siding is important. So there is the station, and this was the Tongham Raid. Right. Now, I found the other day, you're always finding out stuff, I found an old press cutting from the Aldershot News in 1944 about bombs on Aldershot. And they showed this very same picture. And what they actually say is, 6 weeks later, after the first bombing raid on Aldershot, the town was again to suffer its heaviest raid of the war. On the night of August the 22nd, 3 bombs fell in Cargate Terrace area, causing slight damage. But half an hour later, the bombers returned. 10 high explosive bombs went off harmlessly in Manor Park, but then one of the pilots struck lucky. Probably by the light of the flares, though some people at the time blamed torch signals from near enemy agents, he saw a goods train in the sidings at Alshot Station. What he did not know was it was loaded with salvaged ammunition, ready to be unloaded at the army munitions depot, on which is now there's a housing estate there. It was British Telecom's site before that. The plane swept in over the church, the pilots releasing his bombs with split-second precision. One of the trucks went up with a roar, setting fire to 8 others. The sky lit up like a... you can imagine. I won't carry on with that. Any road up. This was a press cutting about George Keane, who was one of the men who rushed to the site of the explosion. 2 railway employees, George Frederick Keane and George Henry Leach, bravely uncoupled the burning wagons and pushed them to safety, thereby preventing a massive explosion which might have destroyed the village. They were awarded the George Medal for their gallantry. Sadly, George Keane died a few days later before he could receive the award. 2 military personnel, Captain Johnson and RSM Harrison, also received medals, and 10 other men from a salvage unit were cited for their gallant conduct and devotion to duty. Now, at Tongham Crossroads, there's a memorial to George Keane and George Leach, but it doesn't mention Captain Johnson and RSM Harrison. Now, whether this was because they were army and were expected to come to the rescue, whereas the other 2 weren't army and therefore weren't expected, but there is a campaign, a movement afoot in Aldershot, in Tongham at the moment, to actually get the memorial redone, because there's only a little plaque on a raised flower bed, and actually mention the 2 army people as well. There was, in fact, miraculously, only 1 civilian casualty. There was a little boy called Wilfred Friday of Spoil Lane, and he died of shrapnel wounds, aged 19. And sad thing about that, it's sad for his parents. His parents only had 2 sons, and his brother, his only brother, was in the Navy. He was an able seaman, and he died at sea, and he's on Tongham War Memorial, but little Wilfred John isn't. As I say, the bombs fell on the train. That's what did the most damage. But it also damaged the school, and there was a bomb that fell in the churchyard and one that fell in the fields. And they also dropped incendiary bombs, of which later. George Keane, who I mentioned before, was actually a local scoutmaster, and there is a website where I got this picture from, and showing him in his scout uniform. He was obviously a very brave man. And George Leach was presented with a medal by Southern Railway for his bravery. And I always think this picture, rather cynically, shows what happened to people before the National Health Dental Service came in. Because, let's face it, I'm not a good example, but he does look as though a good set of National Health nashers might have done him the world of good. There are other people, obviously, involved in the rescue and clearing up aftermath. That is the George Cross citation from the London Gazette. I don't know if you can, I'll read it out to you, although they always say it's not a good thing to read from the screen. Ammunition train of some 50 wagons standing on a single line railway was hit by an explosive bomb during an air raid. Keane and Leach hastily collected a working party to help remove the damaged wagons to a place of safety. The moving of the wagons took about 2 hours, And during the whole of that time, the burning wagons were exploding and debris was shooting in all directions. But for the action of Keane and Leach in starting and directing the work of moving the wagons, it is likely that most of the train would have caught fire with greater damage to life and property in the neighbourhood. Both men acted quite regardless of their own safety and at very considerable personal risk. And bearing in mind they are manhandling these heavy railway trucks loaded with ammunition, which, let's face it, isn't lightweight. And they are pushing these wagons one at a time. I think, in fact, there were 50 trucks in all, one at a time, starting with the furthest one, away from safety so that the fire couldn't leap from wagon to wagon and so send the whole thing up. And we did have a local fire brigade, and there are our gallant lads outside one of the houses in Tongham. And I've got a second picture of them, which is them outside the local village pub. And when I did this talk 10 years ago, one of the chaps came up to me afterwards and said, "I remember that photo being taken," he said. "We had great difficulty getting the lads out of the pub to pose because they were all in there knocking back their pints, and they really had to be sort of persuaded to come out and have their pictures taken." But I mean, these are all volunteer firemen. They are not the regular fire brigade, and they are very brave people. I think this is the wartime spirit, the Blitz spirit, which nowadays people perhaps decry and dismiss a bit. And of course, we also had our local home guard. Now, here are 8 of them. This picture, again, was given to me by the daughter of one of the men on that picture, whose dad was one of the senior ones. And I know the old local defence volunteers look duck and vanish. They were somewhat decried, and the Home Guard programme, you know, with on the TV sort of made fun of them. But they were volunteers. They were mostly elderly or perhaps not in regular occupations, or young men who perhaps couldn't be called up to fight. And they did a damn fine job. And I have a picture of sorry, it's from the newspaper, so it's a bit blurry, this, I'm afraid. But there they are, and I'm pleased to say that there are some women on there. So it wasn't just a masculine prerogative that you joined the Home Guard. There are our gallant lads and lasses. And some of them, in fact, are my neighbours. The girl at the top there on the far end, she lived just up the road from my parents. One of the others is one of my neighbours from next door. One of the chaps was our next door neighbour. I've got somewhere here the photo, if anybody wants to see it afterwards. And when I read the list of names, I know them all. I was brought up in the village. They were my parents' friends, neighbours. I went to school with their kids, etc., etc. And when you're researching something like this, you use what you can find in the way of local information. So local history books and personal and family reminiscences. And when you get people talking, it's surprising what comes out. So there are 2 sources of information for Tongham, both written in the 1970s, so they are 50 years out of date. But because they were close to the events of 1940, so it's only 30 years on, they are quite good and reliable sources. Now, one of them is this book by Howard Cole, who wrote the stock book on Aldershot history in 1950. Colonel Cole lived in Tongham village. He was an ex-army officer, and he wrote this book, and it was published by the church. And what he wrote was this: war came to the village during the night of the 22nd, 23rd of August 1941. 10 days previously, an ammunition train had drawn into a siding at the station. Enemy aircraft had reconnoitred the area without making an attack, But between 11 p.m. and midnight on the 23rd of August, an attack was made with high explosive incendiary bombs, which fell on the railway siding, the station, and one stick of high explosives straddled Poyled Road, exploding in the churchyard, damaging windows in the church and the burial ground. Among the military and civilians who rushed to the scene of the enemy attack were the Tongham railway station staff, for the incendiary bombs had fallen on the station, and on the 50 wagons of the ammunition train, igniting the dangerous explosive contents. The imminent danger to the station, the railway bridge and the residents in Grange Road backing onto the railway was obvious, and the railway staff set to work uncoupling the wagons loaded with ammunition. In this work, Mr. George Frederick Keane and Mr. George Henry Leach, railway employees, particularly distinguished themselves by uncoupling the wagons and settling them rolling down the track into the open country west of the farm, thereby preventing explosions in the built-up area of the village. Both men were awarded the George Medal for their gallantry. Sadly, before he could receive his George Medal, Mr. Keane died on the 24th of May, 1941, so it was in fact nearly a year later. His widow received her late husband's medal, and a brass plaque to commemorate the gallantry was placed on one of the planters on the corner of Tongham Crossroads. And this is the one which we want to be redone with, and including the two military men. And the other Tongham history book was written by my ex-headmaster at Tongham School, Jeff Birch. And he gives what I think, Colonel Colesman is a very military position, I think. Jeff Birch's account is more personal because he was actually involved. The 23rd of August 1940 was momentous. The plane that fired the ammunition train dropped 5 explosive bombs, the second of which landed some 100 yards from the school building, the blast removing most of the glass and hundreds of roof tiles. The 3rd, 4th and 5th exploded harmlessly across fields to the south, but of number 1 I had first-hand experience. Arriving at school the next morning, I was met by 2 of my senior boys cheerfully groaning under the weight of sacks, half filled with bomb fragments and burnt-out incendiary cases. And in the churchyard, my caretaker and the village postman were standing over a small hole in which could be seen some tangled metal. This was, I assumed, a jettisoned incendiary canister. We stood by the hole in animated conversation until I was called to the institute, that's the village institute where that photo was taken, where the Archdeacon of Surrey, Bishop Golding Bird, wished to consult me regarding the plight of refugees evacuated during the night from houses in Grange Road. Returning to the school 1 hour later, I was advised by a tin-hatted constable not to venture through the playground, as there was an unexploded bomb in the churchyard. Following this incident, and for more than a year, school assembled in the village hall on a 2-shift basis until the vigorous promptings of Colonel Bond persuaded the managers to repair the school proper, the War Damage Commission eventually reimbursing their expenditure. And there again, my family had personal memory of this, because my elder sister wasn't of school age, but my middle sister, Valerie, who's now 95, was. She was a pupil at the village school. When the school was bombed and the building couldn't be used, the kids were sent to different venues in the village hall, the institute, one of the other halls, the chapel. And my mother thought this was not a good thing, so she sent her back to Newport Road School in Aldershot, where she finished her education, because my parents had moved. But even there again, I have got even more personal reminiscences, because this is the house next door to where I lived. This is number 45 The Street, or as it was then, number 3 Neston Villas, and we lived in the other half of the semi, at number 4 Neston Villas, or 49 The Street. And the lady standing outside looking all casual in the 1950s is my next door neighbour, Anne Cantillon. And I asked her what she remembered, and she wrote me an article for the Ash Museum newsletter, because Ash Museum covers Tongham. And Anne was aged 5 at the time, and she recalls the night vividly. Anne and her sister Kathleen were spending the night in their mother's bedroom, which was at the front of the house. Their father, Thomas, was working the night shift and fire watching at the RAE in Farnborough. Anne was awakened by a scream and at the same time a sensation of being pushed out of bed by her mother. An incendiary bomb had dropped through the roof and it had landed on the bed. By this, she was woken up by the sensation of being pushed out of bed by her mother. By this time, the bed was ablaze and her nightgown was singed. A stray incendiary bomb had fallen off on the roof, penetrating the rafters and ceiling, and fallen onto the bed beneath and set the bedclothes alight. Her 2 brothers, and these are they, John and Alan, kept the fire under control with a stirrup pump and bucket of sand, which was always kept on the landing, as in most English households in England at the time. Anne remembers being carried by Mr. Jim Snellgrove, who lived in the house 2 doors up, who led the family to the safety of his huge air raid shelter, as their air raid shelter was damp and full of frogs. The following morning, while cycling along Oxon Road on his way home, their father, Mr. Cantillon, was hailed by someone coming the other way. "Good morning, Tom," he said cheerfully. "Your house copped it last night." And then the chap went merrily on his way. When Mr. Cantillon arrived home, he was relieved to find everyone safe, even though the bedroom windows were broken and the bedroom furniture was piled up in the front garden. And Anne also remembers that for years afterwards, especially after rain, the smell from the incendiary bomb still lingered in that room. So that is my neighbour Anne's story. And this is my sister. This is my sister Jacqueline, my late sister Jacqueline. She died 15 years ago. And when I was researching this, as I say, we're going back 20 plus years, I got in touch with sister and I said, "Well, what do you remember about it?" And this is her story. In the past, Tongham's claim to fame was its alleged treacle mines, but on August 22nd, 1940, changed that. It had been a beautiful, warm, calm evening. My sister Valerie and I were wakened by various bangs and explosions. I looked out of the bedroom window to find that our garden was in flames. I was very concerned because there was a small aviary out there belonging to my father. I bundled my 10-year sister into her dressing gown, rushed downstairs and pushed her under the kitchen table. Then rather foolishly, I opened the back door. It still didn't occur to me we were having an air raid until I looked up and saw the aeroplane directly overhead. I was too angry to feel frightened. There was a pounding of feet up the path and a couple of wardens rushed in and told us the adjoining house had an incendiary bomb through the roof and we must leave at once. So Valerie disappeared with one warden and I was told to collect any valuables and papers before leaving. The remaining warden urged me to hurry, and I couldn't think of anything to take except the cups I'd won for swimming, which I collected off the sideboard. As we left the house, the warden asked after the whereabouts of our parents, who had gone into Aldershot that evening. I was told to take shelter, but suddenly realised that my sister was missing, so I said I wasn't going anywhere without her. In retrospect, it must have been quite a sight, as I was tearing up and down the road, clutching my swimming cups, hotly pursued by various brave men trying to capture me. Finally, Valerie was located in a shelter up the road, the Snellgrove family, at number 1 Neston Villas, because they had a shelter in their back garden, because Mrs. Snellgrove was expecting a baby at the time. In fact, she had a subsequent baby who I was at school with. Apparently, our parents, on their way back from Aldershot, had seen the raid. My father, with great presence of mind, had seen the plane flying low overhead and pushed my mother into the roadside dish. Well, my mother was a very person, very conscious of her own dignity. She was absolutely livid at my father's behaviour in pushing her into a ditch. But the plane went over and they continued walking home, and they saw the train alight and exploding, and as they ran for home to see what had happened to their daughters, they were passed by a fire engine. The fire engine stopped outside their house. Imagine my mother and father's horror and distress when the fire engine didn't go on up the road but stopped outside my parents' house and parked outside because of the fire in the roof of the house next door. Mother and father joined the Cantillons family in the air raid shelter, but at first my mother couldn't find her daughters and she was absolutely beside herself with worry. When she did find them, and she found them in the air raid shelter, she met Mrs. Cantillon and her 4 children there. And Mrs. Cantillon's main worry was the fact she couldn't find her false teeth. When it all quietened down, with true British grit, we had cups of tea, thankful to have survived the raid unscathed. As for the end of the story, our little birds in their aviary were unharmed. The majority of the ammunition train parked in the siding at Tongham was saved due to the bravery of Messrs. Keane and Leach, and the treacle mine is still out there somewhere. But one result of it was that my sister was determined to get her own back on the Germans, and as soon as she was 18, she joined the WAF, and she served down in Devon at Hartland Point on radar, and there she met her future husband, who was a local curate, and she became a vicar's wife for 60 years, and they're sadly both dead now, but she also had been brought, and as I say, I had been brought up on this story of the bravery of the village and what happened. As I said, it was the most exciting thing that had happened in Tongham since the Civil War and possibly Queen Victoria come to visit Aldershot. And also, as I keep emphasising, it wasn't just the railwaymen, the fire brigade, the Home Guard, etc., etc. There were other civilians involved. And this you probably can't read because it's not very clear. So hopefully I've got it on a slide, on a picture. And then again, perhaps I haven't. Yes, here we go. It's in that. No, it's not. Talk amongst yourselves, folks. Anyway, basically what it says is, Dear Miss Snellgrove, you may recognise the name. She is a relation of the Snellgrove whose air raid shelter my parents and the kids and the neighbours all sheltered in. Thank you, and it's from the British Red Cross Society, and it's thanking Miss Nora Snellgrove, who was one of the nurses. Actually, I have got a transcript of it. Come on, Picken, get your act together. It's a letter of thanks to one of the Red Cross nurses, Nora Snellgrove, from the local Red Cross. And the other Red Cross nurses are Monica Cooper, who was the daughter of the vicar, and the aunt of the actor Anthony Andrews of Brideshead Revisited fame, Mrs. Ellicott and Mrs. Jarvis. So, as I say, the women were involved as well. And my last, thank you, Phil, my last thing is something that came from Guildford Rural District Council, also to Nora Snellgrove, and also thanking her and the other nurses for their help in taking part in it. But as I say, I was brought up on this story, particularly the bit about my mother being very cross about being pushed into the ditch. That seemed to be, you know, the fact that the train had gone up and people, one person was killed and, you know, fire destruction, all that. But my mother's dignity was affronted, and that was not good news. Okay, that's it. I'm sorry if I've gone on too long, and I'm sorry I've broken the lamp. If anybody's got any questions, or if anyone wants to see some of the pictures I've got, I've got a picture of the two polished brass shells that somebody now uses for flower vases. I've got a picture of a piece of shrapnel, which somebody had rescued. I've got various other people's reminiscences and the like concerned, how they hid under the kitchen table. Or there was also a story going round, how true it was or not, that they'd seen lights from the Hogsback Hotel up on the Hogsback there, high ground. They'd seen lights coming from the tower of it, and they were signalling the German bombers to come in and bomb Tongham. Who knows? Anybody, anything?
That's just something, Jim. Yeah. Just on the additional information.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there was an unexploded bomb, there should be a record of that unexploded bomb and also the work that was done at the National Archive Office. What have you got?
I have got various sources of information because over the years people have done all sorts of bits of research. And as I say, it's still going on. It's only about a year ago a chap got in touch with me through the Aldershot Military Museum because he's a descendant of one of those army officers who got the George Medal but who is not publicised enough. And as I say, they put the emphasis on the civilian but not on the... But it's interesting how every so often the local press sort of revise the story. I'd not heard the bit written in 1994 that there'd been a raid in Aldershot on the same night, which makes sense. I'd always imagined that they were just coming back from bombing London, bombing the docks. They had a few bombs to spare, so they just dropped them willy-nilly. And this business about German spies signalling them was just... But that was the rumour going around the village at the time. And we all know how rumours can spread and get wheels and wings and what have you. So, yeah. But as I say, I've got all sorts of bits here. If anybody wants to have a look at them, they're more than welcome. That's the picture from the Farnham Herald of the gallant ARP squad in 1943. And they're actually outside the Village Institute, which was built in the 1880s. Tongham was a hop growing village, and to prevent the hop pickers frequenting the 5 village pubs and getting absolutely out of their skin, out of their minds, that was a temperance place. They were keen on temperance. Yeah. And as I say, that was the one from, that's the bit from the, there's a WW2 People's War website with all sorts of stories, including this one. There was something in the Hampshire magazine in 1990, same picture. A chap called, oh God, what? This is Aldershot News, 1991. There we go. Personal reminiscence of the night war came to a village. There we go. A bloke called Reginald Nash. I like the headline. They were dropping bombs, not pork pies.
Yes, that's very good. I like the way that these treacle mines keep on cropping up. I mean, you have them in Chobham and...
Well, like most...
No one seems to know what they were.
We've got something in Ash Museum about it. Apparently, after the army came to Aldershot, and came back from the Crimean War, they had some tubs, some cans of molasses, which they no longer needed. And so they had them on a siding in Tongham Station. And they didn't want them, so they just chucked them to one side, and then they got buried. And then years later, a farmer was digging there, and he found all this black, treacly, sticky stuff. And the Tongham Treacle Mines legend was born. So I'm reliably informed by the museum, and Sally should know because she's
Chobham people don't seem to have discovered anything about theirs. They're a mystery.
There's the picture. Shell cases from the old ammunition train, salvaged by Stanley Parrott, who worked on the line at the time. That's the piece of shrapnel which somebody saved. But I like the idea of the little lads in the churchyard, you know, gathering up fragments of bombs and what have you, and them discovering there's actually still a live bomb there.
Yes.
Kids.
Anyway, you've really brought that place to life, and the title, you know, is thoroughly justified, wasn't it? So more people now know all about this, and maybe it'll lead on to other things. But
Thank you very much for being such an attentive audience.
Right. Just before anyone leaves, I want to notice going up today is the history of the British Legion by Patrick Mathey next week. And it's followed, strangely enough, by Phil Stevens and Gill Riding on the next two sessions. So, yes, Gill Riding is doing all about local impact of World War II. I'm not sure that she'll have this on her agenda, though. So, thanks for coming. Very good audience, and look forward to having you again next week. So.
Thank you.